An elderly man sat alone inside a warm, bustling diner, quietly wiping away his tears. He had dressed in his best, carefully pressed suit for a dinner his son had just cancelled, and now he faced yet another lonely Christmas night. But suddenly the diner door swung open, and a young black mother and her little girl hurried in. The girl froze, tugged her mother's sleeve, then pointed straight at him. And before anyone could react, she walked over, gently pulled his coat sleeve and whispered, "Are you sad because nobody came to eat with you?" What happened next would change all three of their lives forever. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from, subscribe and get hyped because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The snow fell soft and steady over Tampa Bay that Christmas Eve, a rarity for Florida that made the night feel like something borrowed from a dream. Inside Rosie's Diner on Dale Mabry Highway, the windows glowed warm against the dark, and the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon rolls filled the air. Henry Mitchell sat alone at table 7, a table set for two. He was 74 years old, though his hands looked older, weathered and spotted, trembling slightly as he adjusted the silverware that didn't need adjusting. He wore his good suit, the charcoal one he'd bought 20 years ago for his wife Margaret's funeral and had worn only for special occasions since. The fabric was worn at the elbows, the collar slightly frayed, but he'd pressed it carefully that afternoon, wanting to look presentable. For his son. David was supposed to meet him at 7. They'd made plans 3 weeks ago, a rare dinner together, just the two of them, like they used to have before David's life became consumed by hospitals and board meetings and charitable galas where tickets cost more than most people earned in a month. Henry checked his phone for the 4th time in 10 minutes. The screen was cracked, he dropped it last month, and couldn't figure out how to get it repaired, but he could still read the messages clearly enough. Nothing new. Around him families laughed and celebrated. A young couple fed their baby girl mashed sweet potatoes, her face covered in orange mess, her giggles infectious. An elderly pair sat holding hands across their table, not speaking but present, together. 3 generations gathered at a long table near the window, grandchildren climbing over their grandfather's lap while he pretended to be a monster, and they shrieked with delight. Henry watched them and felt the emptiness in his chest grow heavier. At 7:15 his phone finally buzzed. He grabbed it so quickly he nearly knocked over his water glass. His heart lifted for just a moment before plummeting as he read the words on the screen. "Dad, I'm so sorry, emergency at the hospital, can't make it, I'll call you tomorrow. Merry Christmas." Henry stared at the message for a long time. He read it 3 times, as if the words might change meaning, might reveal some hidden promise that his son would still come, would still choose him, over whatever crisis demanded attention tonight. But the words stayed the same. He set the phone down carefully and looked at the empty chair across from him. The waiter had already brought bread and set out a second napkin, had filled both water glasses. "It's okay," Henry whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the diner's cheerful chaos. "He's busy. Important work, people need him." But his eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of all these happy families. He raised his hand to signal the waiter, a young man with kind eyes who'd been watching Henry with poorly concealed concern, and started to ask for the check. Started to go home to his small apartment where no lights were waiting, where no stockings hung by any fireplace, where the television would be his only company. But before he could speak, the door chimed, and 2 people stepped inside. A woman and a little girl, both bundled against the unexpected Florida cold in mismatched scarves and knit hats. The woman was in her early 30s, her dark skin glowing with warmth despite the winter chill, her hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore scrubs under her coat, pale blue with little yellow ducks printed on them, and moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to long shifts on her feet. The little girl was 6 years old, all energy and curiosity, her eyes wide as she took in the decorated diner. She wore a purple coat 2 sizes too big, probably a hand-me-down, and light-up sneakers that blinked red and green with every bouncing step. "Mama, look," the girl exclaimed, tugging on the woman's hand. "They have hot chocolate with marshmallows." The woman Nina smiled down at her daughter with the kind of love that made Henry's chest ache. "We'll see, baby, let's find a table first." The hostess led them across the diner, and as they passed table 7, the little girl stopped. She looked directly at Henry, her gaze settling on the empty chair across from him, then moving to his face. Her expression shifted from curiosity to something that looked like recognition, though they'd never met. "Mama," she whispered, loud enough for Henry to hear. "Why is that man crying?" Nina followed her daughter's gaze and saw what Henry hadn't realized. Tears were indeed sliding down his weathered cheeks, slow and silent. He wiped at them quickly, embarrassed, turning his face away. "Zoe, honey, it's not polite to," Nina started, but Zoe had already pulled free of her mother's hand. The little girl walked straight to Henry's table and looked up at him with the fearless compassion only children possess. "Are you sad because nobody came to eat with you?" she asked simply. Henry opened his mouth but found he couldn't speak. The directness of the question, the genuine concern in this child's eyes, broke something open inside him that he'd been trying to keep sealed. He nodded, just once. Zoe's face broke into a radiant smile. "Mama, can we sit with him? Christmas is for being together. Nobody should eat alone on Christmas." Nina's first instinct was to apologize, to pull her daughter away, to respect this stranger's privacy and dignity. She'd worked enough shifts in the community hospital to know that sometimes people wanted to be left alone with their grief. But she also saw something in Henry's face, a desperate gratitude, a longing so profound it made her heart hurt. "I don't want to intrude," Nina said gently, meeting Henry's eyes, "but if you'd like some company, we'd be happy to join you." Henry looked at this woman and her daughter, strangers who owed him nothing, who had their own Christmas plans, their own celebration waiting, and felt something crack inside the wall he'd built around his loneliness. "I would like that very much," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Please." Nina helped Zoe into the chair across from Henry, the chair David was supposed to fill, and took the seat the waiter quickly brought to the side of the table. The young server looked relieved, glad that the lonely old man wouldn't be eating alone after all. "I'm Zoe," the little girl announced, extending her small hand across the table with formal seriousness. "I'm 6 years old, this is my mama Nina. She saves people." "I'm a nurse," Nina clarified with a warm smile. "At Bay General Hospital," but Zoe likes to make it sound more dramatic. "You do save people," Zoe insisted. "You told me you helped that baby breathe when it was born too early." Nina's cheeks colored slightly. "Well, the doctors and I work together as a team." Henry shook Zoe's hand solemnly, matching her seriousness. "I'm Henry. Henry Mitchell. It's very nice to meet you both." "Why were you crying, Mr. Henry?" Zoe asked with the blunt honesty children haven't yet learned to disguise. "Zoe," Nina said gently, "remember what we talked about. Some questions are too personal." "But I want to help," Zoe protested. "You said helping is good." Henry surprised himself by answering. "I was crying because I was supposed to have dinner with my son tonight, but he had to work. Important business. People depending on him." The words tasted bitter as he said them, like he was making excuses for David when the truth was simpler and more painful. His son had chosen work over him. Again, Zoe processed this information with the seriousness of a judge. "That's sad. But maybe he really had to work. Mama has to work sometimes on special days too, but she always comes home and we have a special day after." Nina felt her throat tighten. She did have to work holidays sometimes. Single mothers and community hospital nurses didn't get the luxury of choosing their schedules. But she always made it up to Zoe. Always found time to celebrate, even if it was late or rescheduled. Looking at Henry's face, she suspected his son didn't do the same. "Let's order," Nina said, opening her menu and handing one to Zoe. "What sounds good, baby?" "Pancakes," Zoe declared immediately. "For dinner?" Nina laughed. "It's Christmas. Christmas is for pancakes if you want pancakes." Henry found himself smiling, really smiling for the first time in weeks. "Your daughter has excellent logic, Nina." "She usually does," Nina admitted. "All right, pancakes for dinner, because it's Christmas." They ordered pancakes for Zoe, a turkey sandwich for Nina, because she'd worked a double shift and needed actual protein, and a bowl of chicken soup for Henry, because his stomach had been too nervous earlier to consider anything heavier. When the food came, Zoe insisted on saying grace, reaching across the table to hold both their hands. "Thank you for this food and for new friends and for Christmas magic, and please help Mr. Henry not be sad anymore." "Amen. Amen," Nina and Henry echoed quietly. As they ate, Zoe chattered about everything: her school, her favorite teacher Mrs. Rodriguez, the class hamster named Sparkles who bit her finger once, the art project they were doing where everyone got to paint their favorite place. She was a beam of pure sunshine, her enthusiasm and joy impossible to resist. Henry told them about his late wife Margaret, how she used to make the best pecan pie in all of Tampa, how she'd love to dance even when there was no music playing. He talked about the 37 years they'd been married, how she'd been gone for 5 years now and he still reached for her hand sometimes in his sleep. Nina shared stories about Zoe's birth, about becoming a single mother when her daughter's father walked away before Zoe was even born, about going back to school while working night shifts and relying on her neighbor Mrs. Patterson to watch Zoe when childcare fell through. "You did all that alone?" Henry asked, genuine admiration in his voice. "Not completely alone," Nina said. "I had Mrs. Patterson, and the nurses I work with became like family. And Zoe," she looked at her daughter with so much love, Henry felt it like a physical warmth. "Zoe has always been my reason to keep going. To be better, to show her that you can face hard things and come through them stronger." They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily, naturally, like they were old friends catching up rather than strangers who'd met less than 90 minutes ago. Other diners came and went, the restaurant slowly emptied as families headed home to finish their celebrations. Finally Nina glanced at her watch. "Oh my goodness, it's almost 9. Zoe baby, we need to get home. Tomorrow's a big day, but I don't want to leave Mr. Henry." Zoe protested. "I don't want you to leave either," Henry admitted. "This has been the best Christmas I've had in a very long time. Thank you both. Truly." Nina reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for letting us join you. Are you okay to get home? Do you need a ride?" Henry shook his head. "My apartment is just 3 blocks away. I'll be fine." They gathered their coats and hats, and when Nina tried to pay for her and Zoe's meal, Henry had already taken care of it, had quietly given the waiter his card while they'd been putting on their scarves. "Mr. Henry," Nina protested, "you didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Henry said firmly. "You gave me something tonight that money can't buy. You gave me companionship, kindness, a Christmas that didn't hurt. Let me do this small thing in return." Nina's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Zoe threw her arms around Henry's waist in a fierce hug. "Will we see you again, Mr. Henry?" Henry looked down at this little girl who'd seen his sadness and decided to fix it with the simple gift of her presence, and he felt something he hadn't felt since Margaret died: hope. "I would like that very much," he said. Nina pulled out a pen from her purse and wrote her phone number on a napkin. "Call me if you need anything, or if you just want company. We live in the Riverside neighborhood, not far from here." Henry tucked the napkin into his pocket like it was precious treasure. "Thank you, Nina. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Mr. Henry." They walked out together into the rare Florida snow which was already starting to melt but still made the night magical. Zoe skipped ahead, trying to catch snowflakes on her tongue, while Nina and Henry walked more slowly behind her. At the corner where they would go separate directions, Zoe turned back and waved enthusiastically. "Bye, Mr. Henry. I love you." The words were so casual, so natural to her, spoken with the easy affection of someone too young to know that love was supposed to be complicated or earned over time. Henry waved back, his vision blurring with tears again, but these were different tears than the ones that had fallen earlier. These weren't tears of loneliness, these were tears of gratitude, of wonder, of being seen and valued by someone who had no reason to care except basic human decency. He walked home to his small apartment and for the first time in 5 years didn't feel like he was walking into a tomb. He felt like he was walking into a space where life, real life, with connection and meaning might still be possible. Before bed he looked at the napkin Nina had given him, her phone number written in neat careful handwriting, and whispered into the empty room, "Thank you, Margaret, for sending them to me tonight." And somewhere, he liked to imagine, his late wife smiled. 1 week later, on New Year's Eve afternoon, Henry pushed his shopping cart through the Publix on Kennedy Boulevard, trying to navigate the chaos of last-minute shoppers stocking up for their celebrations. He'd made a list before leaving home: milk, bread, eggs, canned soup, coffee, bananas, the basics that would get him through another week of meals eaten alone at his small kitchen table. He moved slowly through the aisles, his arthritis making his steps careful and deliberate, especially on the slick tile floors that the constant flow of customers tracked with water from the parking lot. The cashier was a young woman who called him sweetie and packed his bags with care, making sure the eggs were on top where they wouldn't get crushed. Henry appreciated these small kindnesses, the way she asked about his day and actually waited for his answer instead of the perfunctory fine most people expected. He paid, gathered his 3 plastic bags, refusing the offer of help out because he was old but not helpless, "Thank you very much," and stepped out into the gray afternoon. The temperature had dropped again, unusual for Tampa, and a light drizzle made everything slick. Henry adjusted his grip on the bags and started across the parking lot toward the bus stop. He didn't see the patch of oil and water mixed together near a parked car. His right foot hit the slick spot and went out from under him. For one terrible moment, Henry was airborne, his arms windmilling uselessly, the grocery bags flying from his hands. He hit the wet pavement hard, the impact drove the air from his lungs. Pain shot through his left hip, the one that already gave him trouble, the one the doctor kept saying might need replacing but that his insurance barely covered, and he couldn't afford the deductible for anyway. For a moment, he just lay there on the cold, wet ground, stunned and humiliated and hurting. His groceries had scattered across the parking lot. A can of soup rolled under a nearby truck, an orange bounced twice and disappeared between parked cars. A few people walked past, glancing at him but not stopping. One man actually stepped over Henry's outstretched leg without pausing, too focused on his phone to notice or care that an elderly man was lying on the ground in the rain. Henry tried to sit up, his hip screamed in protest, and fresh pain made him gasp. He was going to have a bruise the size of Florida, and probably worse. "Oh my God, Mr. Henry." He looked up through the drizzle to see Zoe running toward him, her mother close behind, both of them laden with their own groceries, but dropping them immediately when they recognized him. "Mr. Henry, are you hurt?" Zoe's small face appeared above him, her eyes wide with worry. "I'm okay, sweetheart," Henry managed, though his voice shook. "Just clumsy old fool, slipping like that." Nina was already kneeling beside him, her nurse training taking over. She did a quick visual assessment, her hands gentle as she checked his head for cuts, looked at his pupils to check for signs of concussion, felt along his arms and legs for obvious breaks. "Where does it hurt most?" she asked, her voice calm and professional but warm. "My hip," Henry admitted. "Left side. It's an old problem." "Okay, I'm going to help you sit up slowly. Tell me if anything feels wrong." Nina positioned herself carefully and helped Henry into a sitting position, supporting his weight with surprising strength. Zoe had already run to gather his scattered groceries, chasing down the errant orange and crawling under the truck to retrieve his soup can. "Can you stand?" Nina asked. "Take your time, there's no rush." "I think so." But when Henry tried to put weight on his left leg, pain shot through his hip so sharply he nearly fell again. Only Nina's firm grip kept him upright. "All right, we're going to take this really slow," Nina said. "Zoe, baby, can you push that shopping cart over here?" Zoe dragged a nearby abandoned cart to them, and Nina helped Henry use it as a walker, letting him lean heavily on the handle while she supported his other side. "Where's your car?" Nina asked. Henry felt his face flush with embarrassment. "I don't drive anymore, I take the bus." Nina's expression shifted, and Henry saw understanding dawn in her eyes. She glanced at the bus stop 2 blocks away, at the rain that was starting to fall harder, at Henry's obvious pain. "We're taking you home," she said firmly. "No arguments. I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm insisting. Come on." They made slow progress to Nina's car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a child's car seat in the back. Nina got Henry settled in the passenger seat while Zoe climbed in back, then she went back to load all their groceries, his and theirs, into the trunk. "Where do you live?" Nina asked as she started the car. Henry gave her the address, and Nina's expression flickered with something he couldn't quite read: surprise, concern. "The Riverside Apartments," she said quietly. "I know them." The Riverside Apartments were in what real estate agents euphemistically called a transitional neighborhood, and what everyone else knew was one of the poorest sections of Tampa. The building was old, with peeling paint and rusted balconies, but the rent was affordable on Henry's Social Security check, and the manager, Mr. Gomez, kept the heat and water running reliably. As they drove, Zoe leaned forward from the back seat. Mr. Henry, we live in Riverside too, in the yellow building on Oak Street, the Casa del Sol apartments, Henry asked, recognizing the description. That's right, Zoe bounced excitedly, we're neighbors. Nina pulled into the parking lot of Henry's building and insisted on helping him up the 2 flights of stairs to his apartment, Zoe carrying his groceries behind them. Henry's pride wanted to refuse, wanted to insist he could manage, but his hip was throbbing and every step felt like walking on broken glass. His apartment was small, just 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a living room barely big enough for his second-hand couch and old television. But it was clean and tidy, with Margaret's knitted afghans folded neatly on the couch and photographs covering almost every surface. Nina helped Henry to the couch and propped his leg up on a pillow. Ice, she said, heading to his kitchen without asking permission. 20 minutes on, 20 off, for the next few hours. Do you have any anti-inflammatories? In the bathroom cabinet, she returned with ice wrapped in a kitchen towel and 2 ibuprofen tablets, which Henry took gratefully. Zoe had found his refrigerator and was carefully putting away his groceries, organizing them with the meticulous care of someone who'd been taught to help. Your daughter is very responsible, Henry said. Nina smiled, watching Zoe. She's had to grow up a little faster than most 6-year-olds. Single-parent life, she's used to helping out. Still, you've raised a remarkable child. Thank you. Nina's voice was soft. Some days I wonder if I'm doing enough. But she's happy and kind, so I must be doing something right. While Zoe finished with the groceries, Nina did a more thorough check of Henry's injury. The hip was badly bruised, but probably not broken. She'd have insisted on taking him to the emergency room if she suspected a fracture. She showed him some gentle stretches to do later, once the initial swelling went down, and made him promise to rest for the next few days. Do you have anyone who can check on you? Nina asked. Family nearby. Henry hesitated, then shook his head. My son lives in Tampa. He's very successful in healthcare, but he's incredibly busy. I don't want to bother him with something like this. Something flickered in Nina's expression, a flash of anger or judgment or sadness, quickly hidden. I see. He does important work, Henry said, defensive of David even though his son hadn't called since the cancelled Christmas dinner. People depend on him. Everyone needs people to depend on them, Nina said quietly. Even important, busy people need someone to check on them when they fall. The words hung in the air, gentle but pointed. Zoe appeared from the kitchen having discovered the refrigerator's nearly empty state. Mr. Henry, you don't have much food. I had more before I dropped it all, Henry said with a weak smile. Nina and Zoe exchanged a look, one of those wordless mother-daughter communications that carried entire conversations. Mr. Henry, Zoe announced, there's a party tonight, in our courtyard. For New Year's Eve, you have to come. Henry started to decline automatically. Parties were for young people, for families, not for old men with bruised hips who would just be in the way. But Nina spoke before he could. Actually, that's perfect. You shouldn't be alone tonight, not after a fall. The party starts at 7. It's nothing fancy, just neighbors sharing food and celebrating together. Very casual. I couldn't possibly. Yes, you could. Nina interrupted gently. And you should. It's important to have community, especially when you're recovering from an injury. I'm a nurse, remember? Doctor's orders, or nurse's orders in this case. Henry looked at these 2 people, this woman and child who'd already shown him more care in the past week than his own son had managed in 2 years, and felt his resistance crumbling. What time did you say? He asked. Zoe clapped her hands. 7 o'clock. I'll come get you at 6:45. Before they left, Nina wrote down her phone number again. Call me if the pain gets worse, or if you need anything at all. And Zoe gave Henry another of her fierce hugs that made his ribs hurt but his heart feel lighter. After they'd gone, Henry sat on his couch with ice on his hip, looking around his small apartment. On every surface were photographs of his life with Margaret, of David as a boy, of Christmases and birthdays and ordinary moments made precious by time and loss. But there was something missing in these photos, he realized. Joy, connection, the messiness of real life where people showed up for each other, where community mattered more than achievement, where kindness was currency more valuable than money. He picked up his phone, the one with the cracked screen he still hadn't figured out how to fix, and looked at the lack of messages from David. Then he looked at Nina's number, written on a scrap of paper, and waited with more care than any expensive gift. For the first time in a long time, Henry felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely alone in the world after all. At 6:45 that evening, exactly as promised, there was a knock on Henry's door. He'd been ready for an hour, having changed into his other good shirt, the blue one Margaret had bought him for his 70th birthday, and attempted to comb his thin white hair into something presentable. His hips still ached, but the ice and rest had helped considerably, and he could walk with only a slight limp as long as he moved carefully. When he opened the door, Zoe stood there in a sparkly silver dress that was slightly too big and silver shoes that looked like they came from a princess dress-up set. She'd insisted on looking fancy for the party, Nina explained, appearing behind her daughter in jeans and a warm sweater, practical but pretty. "You look very beautiful, Zoe," Henry said seriously. Zoe twirled, the dress spinning out around her. "Thank you, you look handsome too, Mr. Henry." "Ready for the party, as ready as I'll ever be." They walked slowly together through the twilight, Henry moving carefully but managing on his own power, Nina hovering nearby without being obvious about it, ready to catch him if needed. The Casa del Sol apartments were only 3 blocks away, and as they approached, Henry could hear music and laughter floating through the evening air. The courtyard was transformed. Someone had strung up lights, cheap party store decorations mixed with homemade paper lanterns, creating a canopy of warm glow overhead. Long tables had been set up, covered with mismatched tablecloths and laden with food, so much food. Casseroles and rice dishes and fried chicken and salads and desserts, each contribution representing someone's best effort, their way of participating in the communal celebration. There were maybe 40 people gathered, ranging from babies to elderly folks even older than Henry. The demographic was mixed: black families, Hispanic families, a few white families, an Asian couple with twin toddlers. This was the real Tampa, Henry thought, the diverse community that existed beneath the surface of the wealthy, touristy city most people saw. "Nina, you made it." A large woman with warm brown skin and a laugh that could probably be heard 3 blocks away swept Nina into a hug. "And you brought a friend." "This is Henry Mitchell," Nina introduced. "He lives in Riverside too." "Henry, this is Gloria Martinez. She's been organizing these courtyard parties for how long now, Gloria?" 12 years, baby. Ever since my Carlos died and I realized I couldn't sit alone in that apartment one more night, or I'd lose my mind." Gloria shook Henry's hand with the kind of grip that meant business. "Any friend of Nina's is family here. Come on, let me get you some food. You're too skinny." Before Henry could protest, he was swept into the party like a leaf in a friendly current. Gloria loaded a plate for him with enough food for 3 people, all the while introducing him to neighbors whose names he tried desperately to remember but knew he'd forget by tomorrow. There was Marcus, a construction worker in his 40s who'd been laid off before Christmas but was hosting anyway because, as he explained, being broke ain't the same as being poor in spirit. There was Mrs. Chen, an elderly Chinese woman who spoke limited English but communicated perfectly through smiles and by pressing homemade dumplings into everyone's hands. There was a young couple, barely out of their teens, with a newborn baby girl they were so proud of they could barely stop staring at her. And there were children everywhere, running, laughing, playing elaborate games only they understood, their joy infectious and uncontained. Zoe immediately joined the pack of kids, and within minutes was the ringleader of some complicated game involving running around the courtyard's scraggly palm tree while singing a song Henry didn't recognize, but that seemed vitally important to the game's success. Nina guided Henry to a chair at one of the long tables, making sure he sat in a spot where he could prop his injured leg up slightly without being obvious about it. Then she settled beside him with her own plate of food. "This is amazing," Henry said, looking around at the celebration. "How did all this come together?" "Community," Nina said simply. "Nobody here has much money. Most of us work 2 jobs just to make rent, but we have each other. When Marcus got laid off, 3 families brought him groceries without being asked. When Mrs. Chen was sick last month, people took turns checking on her and making sure she ate. When my car broke down and I couldn't afford to fix it, Marcus spent his Saturday under the hood until he got it running again." She took a bite of rice and beans, savoring it. "Gloria's right. If we all stayed in our apartments being lonely and struggling alone, we'd lose our minds. But together we're rich in all the ways that actually matter. Henry felt something in his chest tighten. He lived 3 blocks away in a building full of people he'd never met, never spoken to beyond brief nods in the hallway. He'd been so consumed by his own loneliness that he'd never even considered that community might be available if he just reached out. "How did you find this?" he asked Nina. "When you moved here with Zoe," Nina smiled, remembering. "I didn't find it, it found me. My second week in the building, Zoe got sick, high fever, couldn't keep anything down, and I had to work, or I'd lose my shift. I was panicking, trying to figure out what to do, when Gloria knocked on my door. She'd heard Zoe crying through the walls." Nina's voice grew soft with gratitude. Gloria took one look at the situation and said, "Baby, you go to work, I'll watch this little one." I didn't even know her name yet. But she kept Zoe all day, gave her medicine, made her soup, and had her fever broken by the time I got home. "Wouldn't take a penny for it. Said that's just what neighbors do." She looked around the courtyard at the laughing, eating, celebrating community. After that, I was hooked. These people became my family, more real than my actual family ever was. Henry absorbed this, thinking about his own choices. He'd isolated himself after Margaret died, had pushed away the few friends they'd had as a couple, had told himself it was easier to be alone than to burden others with his grief and need. And his son David, when was the last time David had asked for help, or admitted he needed support? When was the last time either of them had been part of something bigger than themselves? "Mr. Henry," Zoe appeared at his elbow, slightly out of breath from running. "Come dance, please." "Oh, I don't think, my hip." Henry started to decline, but Zoe grabbed his hand with both of hers, tugging gently. "Just a little dance, a small one, please." Someone had turned up the music, and several couples were now swaying together near the string lights. The song was something Latin, rhythmic and warm, the kind of music that made even standing still feel impossible. Nina stood and extended her hand to Henry. "I'll help you, we'll keep it gentle. Doctor's orders, remember, movement is actually good for healing, as long as we're careful." And so Henry found himself on his feet, Nina's hand firm and supportive in his, swaying gently to the music while Zoe spun in circles around them. His hip protested slightly but not unbearably, and the warmth of movement, of music, of being part of something joyful made the small discomfort worth it. Other neighbors drifted over to introduce themselves properly now that he was part of the dancing circle. Gloria's grandson taught him a salsa step that Henry butchered completely, making everyone laugh but not in a mean way, in the way people laugh when someone is brave enough to look foolish for the sake of joy. After the song ended, Henry was breathless and had to sit down, but he was also smiling more genuinely than he had in years. As the evening wore on, and midnight approached, Henry found himself in conversation with Marcus, the laid-off construction worker. They'd gravitated to the quieter edge of the courtyard, away from the main celebration, 2 men comfortable with silence as much as words. "Nina told me you got hurt today," Marcus said. "That fall looked nasty from what she described." "Hip okay, better than I expected," Henry admitted. "Nina took good care of me. She's remarkable, she and Zoe both. Best people I know," Marcus agreed. "Nina's been through hell, single parent, nursing job that barely covers rent. Zoe's father never paid a dime of child support. But she never complains. Just shows up every day and does the work." He took a sip of his soda. "Zoe's going to be something special. That kid's got a heart bigger than the whole state. Last week, she gave her lunch to another kid at school, who didn't have one. Came home hungry, but happy because her friend got to eat." Henry felt his throat tighten. Where does a 6-year-old learn that kind of compassion? "From watching her mama," Marcus said. "Kids learn what they see, not what we tell them. And Zoe sees Nina helping people every day, coming home exhausted but still making time to read stories and play games and make sure Zoe knows she's loved." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Marcus said something that made Henry unexpectedly emotional. "Must be nice though, having a son. Nina mentioned you've got family in Tampa. That's good. Everyone needs family." Henry's throat tightened. He thought about David's successful, accomplished, distant David, who hadn't called back after Christmas, who was probably at some fancy party right now with important people, who'd forgotten that his father existed beyond holiday obligations. "I have a son," Henry said carefully. But family isn't always about blood, sometimes it's about who shows up. Marcus nodded slowly. That's the truth right there. Before Henry could respond, the countdown to midnight began. Someone had turned up the music, and everyone gathered together, counting down from 10, 10, 9, 8. Henry stood, his hip aching but manageable, wanting to be part of this moment. 7, 6, 5. Zoe pushed through the crowd to stand beside him, grabbing his hand. 4, 3, 2. Nina appeared on his other side, linking her arm through his. 1. Happy New Year. The courtyard exploded in cheers and hugs and kisses. Strangers embraced like family. Children blew noisemakers with chaotic enthusiasm. Someone popped a bottle of cheap champagne, the cork flying off into the night sky. Zoe threw her arms around Henry's waist. Happy New Year, Mr. Henry. This year's going to be the best one ever. Nina hugged him too, careful of his injury. Happy New Year, Henry. I'm glad you're here. Henry looked around at these people, his neighbors, though he'd never realized it until tonight. People who welcomed strangers and shared what little they had, and found joy in the simplest things. He thought about his apartment 3 blocks away, about the lonely hours he'd spent there mourning Margaret and feeling forgotten by his son. He thought about David's beautiful house in the wealthy part of Tampa, with its professionally decorated rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. And he thought about this courtyard, with its cheap decorations and mismatched tables and food that came from love rather than money, and he understood something fundamental that he'd forgotten somewhere along the way. Home isn't about buildings, or money or success. Home is about people who show up, people who care, people who make room at their table for lonely old men who fall in parking lots. Thank you, he whispered to Nina and Zoe, though the words felt inadequate for what they'd given him. Thank you for this. As the party continued into the early hours of the new year, Henry stayed, laughing and talking, and being part of something bigger than himself. His hip ached, he was exhausted, but he was also happier than he'd been since Margaret died. And somewhere, in a fancy hospital across town, David Mitchell worked through New Year's Eve without once thinking to call his father. But for the first time in a long time, Henry didn't mind quite as much, because he wasn't alone anymore. The new year brought with it a shift in Henry's life that was subtle at first but grew more profound with each passing week. Nina started stopping by his apartment several times a week, usually in the early evening after her shift at Bay General ended. She'd knock gently, mindful that he might be resting, and let herself in when he called out. Sometimes she brought Zoe with her, sometimes she came alone during Zoe's after-school program hours. At first her visits were purely practical. She'd check his hip, assess his healing, make sure he was doing the gentle exercises she'd taught him. She'd peek in his refrigerator, with a nurse's critical eye, mentally cataloging what he was actually eating versus what he should be eating. Henry, you can't live on canned soup and white bread, she'd scolded gently on her third visit, discovering his nearly empty kitchen. Your body needs real nutrition, especially while it's healing. I manage fine, Henry protested weakly, though they both knew it was a lie. The next evening, Nina appeared with a container of homemade chicken and rice, still warm from her stove. I made extra, it'll just go to waste if you don't eat it. It was a gentle fiction, and they both knew it. Nina barely had enough money to feed herself and Zoe, let alone make extra food. But she'd found ways to stretch her meals, to cook in larger batches that could feed her small family and still leave something to share. Henry accepted the container with hands that trembled slightly, not from age or injury, but from emotion. You don't have to do this, I know, Nina said simply. I want to. The food was delicious, seasoned with spices that reminded Henry of Margaret's cooking, made with care that he could taste in every bite. He ate it slowly that evening, savoring not just the flavors but the kindness it represented. After that, food appeared regularly, never too much, never overwhelming, just enough to supplement his meager groceries and make sure he was actually eating. Nina would drop off containers with careful instructions. Reheat this for 3 minutes, don't let it boil, and Henry would dutifully follow them. But the visits became about more than just food and medical check-ins. Nina would sit with him for a while, usually with a cup of tea. Henry learned to keep stocked especially for her visits. They'd talk about their days, their lives, the challenges they faced and the small victories they celebrated. Nina told him about the hospital, about patients who touched her heart, and moments that reminded her why she'd become a nurse, despite the long hours and low pay. She talked about a baby born premature at just 27 weeks who'd been in the NICU for months, but was finally going home. About an elderly patient with dementia who didn't remember her own daughter, but always smiled at Nina and called her sunshine. About the exhaustion of double shifts and the frustration of never quite making enough money, no matter how hard she worked. I applied for nursing school, Nina told him one evening in late January, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and fear. To get my RN license instead of just being an LPN. It would mean better pay, more opportunities. But it's 2 years of school, and I'd have to cut my hours at work, and I don't know how I'd manage tuition and rent and taking care of Zoe all at once. You'd find a way, Henry said with certainty. You're the most capable person I know, Nina. If anyone can make it work, you can. Her eyes shimmered with tears she didn't let fall. Thank you for believing in me. Sometimes I need someone else to believe first, before I can believe in myself. Henry shared his own stories too, about his life with Margaret, about running a small accounting business before retirement, about David's childhood when things were simpler, and they were closer. He talked about the distance that had grown between him and his son, about feeling invisible in his own family, about wondering if he'd done something wrong to make David pull away. You didn't do anything wrong, Nina said firmly. Some people just get lost in their own success. They forget that titles and money don't mean much if you don't have people who genuinely care about you. He's doing important work, Henry said, but with less conviction than usual. Everyone's work is important if it helps people, Nina countered gently. I clean bedpans and change sheets and hold hands when people are scared. That's important too. Value isn't measured by prestige or salary. These conversations became the highlights of Henry's weeks. For the first time since Margaret's death, he had someone who genuinely listened, who cared about his thoughts and feelings, who treated him like a person with value rather than an old man to be tolerated. But it was Zoe's visits that truly transformed his life. The little girl would burst into his apartment like a small hurricane of energy and joy, always with something new to share. A drawing from art class, a story about school, a rock she'd found that looked exactly like a heart if you squinted right, a joke she'd learned that made absolutely no sense but that she delivered with such enthusiasm Henry couldn't help but laugh. Mr. Henry, look, she'd hold up a painting of something that might be a cat or might be a dinosaur. It was hard to tell, but her pride in it was unmistakable. For you. For your refrigerator, and Henry would ceremoniously hang it with a magnet, right alongside the growing collection of Zoe's artwork that now covered his once bare refrigerator door. She'd curl up beside him on the couch, so trusting and comfortable, and ask him to tell her stories about the old days. Henry would tell her about when Tampa was smaller, about going to the beach before all the hotels were built, about Margaret and their courtship in a time before cell phones and internet made everything feel so rushed and disconnected. Did you love her a lot? Zoe asked one afternoon, her small face serious as she studied a photograph of Margaret that sat on Henry's end table. Very much, Henry said quietly. More than I knew how to say most of the time. Mama says love is showing up. Like when she's really tired but still reads me stories before bed. That's love, even if she doesn't say the words. Zoe looked at Henry with her wise beyond her years eyes. Did you show up for her? Henry felt his throat tighten. I tried to. I didn't always succeed, but I tried. That's good, Zoe declared with the certainty of someone who'd figured out life's important truths. Trying counts. Through Zoe and Nina's regular visits, Henry's apartment slowly came back to life. The air smelled less stale, laughter echoed off walls that had been silent for too long. The television stayed off more often because conversation was better than any show. Henry found himself looking forward to their visits with an anticipation that made his days feel purposeful again. He'd straighten his apartment before they came, not wanting them to see his things in disarray. He'd make sure he had juice boxes for Zoe, the kind with the little straws that she loved. He'd look up jokes on the library's computer during his weekly visits, memorizing them so he could make Zoe giggle. In February, Nina taught him how to video call on his cracked screen phone.
It took several patient attempts, but finally he mastered the technology well enough to call and see Zoe's face on his screen when she wanted to show him something she couldn't wait until their next visit to share. "Look, Mr. Henry," she'd hold up a gap-toothed smile, having lost her first tooth that day. "The tooth fairy brought me $2 whole." Henry felt his heart swell with affection for this child who'd claimed him as her own honorary grandfather, who loved him simply because he'd been lonely, and she'd decided loneliness was something to be fixed. But there were harder conversations too. One evening in mid-February, Nina came alone, her face drawn with exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. She sat on Henry's couch and put her face in her hands. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't keep working these hours and being everything Zoe needs and trying to study for nursing school applications and making rent every month with nothing left over. I'm drowning, Henry. I'm drowning and I don't know how to stop." Henry moved to sit beside her, not touching but close, present. "Tell me what you need." Nina's voice broke. "I need help. I need someone to tell me it's okay to admit I can't do everything alone. I need to not feel like I'm failing Zoe every time I'm too tired to play with her, or too stressed to be patient when she asks the same question for the 10th time." "You're not failing her," Henry said firmly. "Nina, you're giving her everything. You're showing her what strength looks like, what persistence means, how to face impossible challenges with grace. That child adores you, and she should, because you're remarkable." "I don't feel remarkable," Nina whispered. "I feel like I'm barely holding on." "Barely holding on, while still showing up is the definition of remarkable," Henry said. "Margaret used to tell me that heroism isn't about grand gestures, it's about getting up every day and doing what needs to be done even when you're exhausted and overwhelmed and ready to give up. You do that every single day." Nina looked at him through tears. "How did you keep going after Margaret died, when everything felt impossible?" Henry was quiet for a long moment, remembering those dark months after the funeral. "Honestly, I didn't keep going very well. I isolated myself. I pushed people away. I told myself I was fine when I was actually dying inside, just slowly." He took a breath. "But what I've learned, what you and Zoe have taught me, is that we're not meant to do life alone. We need each other. And admitting that isn't weakness, Nina, it's wisdom." Nina leaned her head on Henry's shoulder, and he patted her hand awkwardly, unused to providing comfort but trying anyway. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being here, for caring." "Thank you," Henry replied, "for showing me that family isn't just blood, it's who shows up, who stays, who makes room in their life for you even when they barely have room for themselves." After Nina left that evening, Henry sat alone in his apartment, looking at Zoe's drawings covering his refrigerator, at the empty container from the soup Nina had brought earlier that week, at the phone with Nina's number saved under Nina family.
And he picked up that phone and tried calling David. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. David's voice, smooth and professional. "You've reached Dr. David Mitchell. I'm unable to take your call right now, but please leave a detailed message and I'll return your call as soon as possible." Henry waited for the beep, then spoke into the silence. "David, it's your father. I just wanted to call and say hello. See how you're doing. I know you're busy with important work, but maybe we could have lunch sometime. Nothing fancy, just time together. Call me when you can. I love you." He hung up and stared at the phone, waiting for a return call that didn't come. 3 days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks. David never called back. Meanwhile, Gloria continued to be a bright presence in Henry's expanding world. She'd stop by his apartment unannounced, usually with some excuse: "I made too much flan, you have to help me eat it," or "I need a man's opinion on whether this picture should go on this wall or that wall," but really just checking on him the way she checked on all her neighbors. "You're looking better," Gloria observed one afternoon in late February, studying Henry's face with the discerning eye of someone who'd learned to read people. "More color, more life. Nina and Zoe are good for you. They're the best thing that's happened to me in years," Henry admitted. "And that son of yours?" Gloria asked bluntly. She'd heard the story by now, pieced together from Henry's careful omissions and Nina's more honest frustrations. "He call you back yet?" "No," Henry said quietly, "but he's busy. Important work." Gloria made a sound that clearly indicated what she thought of that excuse. Baby, I don't care how important someone's work is. You make time for family. You make time for the people who matter. Otherwise, what's the point of all that success? She patted Henry's hand with surprising gentleness. But you've got family now. Maybe not the family you were born with, but the family you've chosen. And sometimes that's even better. The call came at 2:17 in the morning on a Tuesday in early March. Nina's phone rang, shocking her out of deep sleep, the kind of exhausted unconsciousness that came from working a double shift and then staying up late to help Zoe with a school project. She grabbed for the phone blindly, her heart already racing because calls at this hour meant emergencies, meant someone needed help. Hello? Her voice was rough with sleep. Is this Nina Rodriguez? An unfamiliar voice, professional, clipped. Yes, who is this? This is Tampa General Hospital. We have a Henry Mitchell here who was brought in by ambulance about an hour ago. He had your number listed as his emergency contact. Are you able to come in? Nina was already out of bed, her nurse training kicking in, her brain clearing instantly despite the late hour. What happened? Is he okay? He collapsed at home. A neighbor heard a noise and found him unconscious. The paramedics suspect a cardiac event, possibly a heart attack. He's stable now, but we need someone here to discuss his care. I'm on my way. 20 minutes. Nina threw on clothes, her hands shaking slightly as she buttoned her jeans. Mrs. Patterson across the hall would watch Zoe. She'd helped before, knew the drill for emergency situations. Nina woke her daughter gently, explained that Mr. Henry was sick and Mama had to go help him, and gratefully accepted Mrs. Patterson's offer to keep Zoe for the rest of the night. Go, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. We'll be fine here. The drive to Tampa General took 17 minutes, Nina breaking speed limits but not caring, her mind racing through possibilities. Heart attack, stroke, something worse. Henry was 74, and despite the gentle exercises and better nutrition, he wasn't in perfect health. Please, she prayed to whatever powers might be listening. Please let him be okay. Tampa General was one of the premier hospitals in the city, far nicer than Bay General where Nina worked. Everything gleamed with expensive cleanliness, the waiting rooms filled with leather furniture rather than plastic chairs, the nurse's station equipped with the newest technology. Nina gave Henry's name at the desk, showed her ID, explained she was listed as emergency contact. The receptionist, professional, efficient, slightly detached, checked her computer. He's in room 412. 4th floor, cardiac wing. The cardiologist is with him now. Nina took the elevator up, her heart pounding, her mind still foggy with sleep and adrenaline. She found room 412 and pushed open the door carefully. Henry lay in the hospital bed, looking smaller and frailer than she'd ever seen him. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking his heartbeat and oxygen levels. An IV dripped clear fluid into his arm. His eyes were closed, his face pale beneath oxygen tubes. A doctor stood beside the bed, reviewing a chart, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and competent hands that had obviously saved many lives. Are you Nina? The doctor asked. Yes. How is he? Stable. He had what we call an acute coronary syndrome. Essentially, one of his coronary arteries became partially blocked, reducing blood flow to his heart. We've given him medications to dissolve the clot and stabilize him, but he's going to need more comprehensive treatment. The doctor, her name tag read Dr. Sarah Chen, gestured for Nina to sit. I need to ask you some questions about Mr. Mitchell's medical history. The ambulance crew found very little information at his apartment, no medication list, no regular doctor listed, no comprehensive family contact information except yours. Nina felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. He has a son, David. He lives somewhere in Tampa. Henry said he works in healthcare, something senior level, but I don't have contact information for him. Does Mr. Mitchell have any other documentation? Insurance cards, medical records, anything that might have additional contacts? I don't know, Nina admitted. I'm just his friend. I check on him regularly, but I don't know all the details of his paperwork. Dr. Chen made a note. That's all right. We'll work with what we have. I'm going to have our social worker try to locate his son through hospital networks and healthcare registries. Someone in a senior healthcare position shouldn't be too difficult to find. She returned her attention to Henry's care, explaining what would happen next. More tests in the morning. A possible cardiac catheterization to determine the extent of blockage, treatment plans that would depend on what they found. Can I stay with him? Nina asked. Are you family? Nina hesitated, then decided truth mattered more than technicalities. Not blood family, but I'm the person who checks on him every day, who makes sure he eats and takes his medications and doesn't fall again. I'm the person who actually shows up. Doctor. Chen studied Nina's face, saw the fierceness there, the protective love that had nothing to do with legal relationships. Then yes, you can stay. I'll make a note in his chart that you're authorized to receive medical information and make decisions if he's unable to. She paused at the door. I'm going to have our staff search for his son. This is the kind of situation where family should be notified. After Dr. Chen left, Nina pulled a chair close to Henry's bed and took his hand gently. His skin was papery thin, cold despite the warm blankets covering him. Hey, she whispered, you scared me. You can't do that, okay? Zoe and I need you around. Henry's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually clearing as he recognized her. Nina, his voice was barely a whisper, rough from the oxygen tube. I'm here, you're okay, you're at Tampa General, and they're taking good care of you. What happened? Henry asked, confusion evident in his tired eyes. Your heart, something about a blockage, but they've stabilized you, and you're going to be fine. Henry's hand tightened weakly around hers. I don't want to be a burden. Stop it, Nina said firmly, but gently. You're not a burden, you're family. And family takes care of each other. David. Henry started, his voice catching. The hospital is trying to find him. Nina said, they'll contact him. He'll come. But even as she said the words, Nina felt doubt curl through her stomach. Would David come? Would the man who'd canceled Christmas dinner and never returned his father's phone calls suddenly appear now, when it actually mattered? They sat together in the quiet hospital room, Nina holding Henry's hand while monitors beeped their steady rhythm and the night slowly gave way to early morning gray outside the window. At 5:33 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Nina looked up, expecting a nurse, and instead saw a man in an expensive suit despite the early hour. He was in his mid-40s, fit and polished, with the kind of practiced confidence that came from years of being obeyed without question. His face was handsome in a generic way, like he'd been designed by committee to look successful and trustworthy. His eyes, when they swept the room, were cold despite their professionally warm expression. This, Nina understood immediately, was David Mitchell. He looked at his father in the hospital bed, at the monitors and IV and oxygen tube, and his face remained carefully neutral. Then his gaze moved to Nina, assessment clear in his eyes. Who are you? Why are you here? What do you want? I'm Nina Rodriguez, she said, not standing, not letting go of Henry's hand. I'm Henry's friend, Dr. David Mitchell, he replied, the title clearly important to him. I'm his son. Henry's eyes opened at his son's voice. David. Dad. David moved closer to the bed, but not as close as Nina sat. What happened? The hospital called me at 3 a.m. They found my contact information through the healthcare administrator network. My heart, apparently, Henry said with a weak attempt at humor. Getting old. You should have called me, David said, and his tone carried reproach. If you'd been having symptoms, if something was wrong, I didn't want to bother you. Henry whispered, and Nina felt fury rise in her chest at those words, at what they revealed about this relationship. David pulled out his phone, already shifting into professional mode. I'm going to arrange your transfer to Bay Cardiac Center. It's one of the best facilities in our network. I'll get you a private room and the top cardiology team. That's not necessary, Henry protested weakly. Yes it is, David said firmly. You're my father. I'm not going to have you receiving substandard care. Tampa General isn't substandard, Nina interjected, unable to stop herself. Dr. Chen is excellent, and Henry is getting exactly the care he needs right here. David's gaze swung to her, really seeing her for the first time. His eyes took in her worn jeans, her Bay General Hospital employee badge still clipped to her shirt from yesterday's shift, the way she held his father's hand like she had every right to be here. I appreciate your concern, David said, his tone dismissive in the way wealthy people dismissed service workers without even realizing they were doing it. But I think I'm better positioned to determine what medical care my father needs. Really? Nina kept her voice level, professional, but couldn't quite hide her anger. When's the last time you took him to a doctor's appointment? When's the last time you knew what medications he was taking, or what his blood pressure runs, or whether he's been eating properly? David's expression flickered,
something like shame crossing his features before being replaced by defensive irritation. "I've been busy with—" "Everyone's busy," Nina interrupted. "That's not an excuse for abandoning your father." The word abandoning hung in the air like an accusation. David's face flushed with anger, or embarrassment, or both. "I haven't abandoned anyone," he said tightly. "I've been working building a healthcare organization that serves thousands of patients. I'm sorry if I haven't had time for social calls." He had a heart attack alone in his apartment at 2 a.m. Nina said, her voice sharp now, her protective instincts for Henry overriding any impulse toward diplomacy. "He's been living on canned soup and social security checks in a rundown apartment because he's too proud to tell you he's struggling. He spent Christmas alone because you canceled dinner for a meeting. So yes, I'd call that abandonment." Nina, Henry whispered, distressed. "It's okay." "No, it's not okay," Nina said, but she gentled her voice for Henry's sake. "You deserve better than this." David looked between Nina and his father, emotions warring on his face, anger, guilt, defensiveness, something that might have been grief. Finally he spoke, his voice cold and formal. "I think we should discuss my father's care privately. Thank you for staying with him, Miss Rodriguez, but I can take it from here." It was a dismissal clear and cutting. Nina wanted to refuse, wanted to stay and protect Henry from the son who'd proven himself unreliable. But Henry squeezed her hand gently, his eyes pleading with her not to make this confrontation worse. "Okay," Nina said quietly. She stood, but leaned down to kiss Henry's forehead. "I'll be right outside if you need me, and I'm coming back this afternoon with Zoe. She'll want to see you." "Thank you," Henry whispered, "for everything." Nina walked past David without looking at him, her hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. In the hallway she leaned against the wall and took several deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. Through the partially open door, she could hear voices, David's professional tone, Henry's weaker responses, a conversation that sounded more like a business transaction than a father and son reunion. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Patterson. "Zoe is asking about Mr. Henry. What should I tell her?" Nina typed back, "Tell her he's going to be okay. I'll be home in an hour." But as she waited in the hallway, Nina realized something that made her stomach twist with anxiety. She just yelled at a senior healthcare executive, someone powerful in Tampa's medical community, someone who could, if he wanted to be vindictive, make her life very difficult. She'd called him neglectful, accused him of abandoning his father, challenged his decisions about care. But even thinking about possible consequences, Nina found she didn't regret her words. They'd needed to be said. Henry deserved someone willing to fight for him, even if that fight came with a price. Nina drove home as dawn broke over Tampa, her mind racing through what had just happened. She confronted David Mitchell in a hospital room, had called him out for neglecting his father, had made it clear she thought he was failing at something fundamental, and she'd do it again in a heartbeat. Mrs. Patterson met her at the door to their apartment, Zoe visible through the open doorway behind her, still in her pajamas, eating cereal at their small kitchen table. "How is he?" Mrs. Patterson asked quietly. "Stable. He had a heart attack, but they've got him stabilized. He's going to need treatment, but the doctors think he'll recover." Nina rubbed her face, exhaustion catching up with her now that the immediate crisis was over. "Thank you for watching, Zoe. Anytime, honey. You know that." Mrs. Patterson studied Nina's face with the concern of someone who'd become like family over the years. "You look like you've got something else weighing on you besides just Henry's health." Nina considered lying, then decided she was too tired for anything but truth. "I met his son, said some things that probably weren't smart, but they needed to be said." "Did he deserve to hear them?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Yes," Nina said without hesitation. "Then you did the right thing. Sometimes the right thing comes with consequences, but that doesn't make it wrong." Mrs. Patterson patted Nina's arm. "Go be with your baby, get some sleep. Whatever happens next, you'll face it together." Zoe looked up when Nina entered, her small face anxious. "Is Mr. Henry okay, Mama?" Nina sat down at the table and pulled Zoe into her lap, holding her daughter close. "He's okay, baby. His heart got sick, but the doctors are helping him. He's going to need to stay in the hospital for a little while to get better." "Can we visit him?" "Yes. This afternoon after you finish school. I'll pick you up early and we'll go see him together." Zoe relaxed against her mother's chest. "I want to bring him one of my drawings, so his hospital room isn't boring." That's a perfect idea, Nina said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. Why don't you make him something special after school? After dropping Zoe off at school later than usual, but Nina had called ahead to explain the family emergency, Nina went home and collapsed into bed. She meant to sleep for just an hour or two, then get up and prepare for whatever might come next. She slept for 5 hours, deep and dreamless, her body claiming the rest it desperately needed. When she woke it was past noon. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from the same Tampa number and 1 voicemail. With dread curling through her stomach, Nina played the message. Miss Rodriguez, this is Dr. David Mitchell. His voice was formal, controlled, revealing nothing. I need to speak with you about my father's care and some other matters. Please call me back at this number at your earliest convenience. Nina stared at the phone. This was it. The consequences she'd been expecting. She could ignore the call, put it off, but that would only delay the inevitable. She called back. David answered on the second ring. Miss Rodriguez, thank you for returning my call. Can you meet me at my father's apartment this afternoon? Say 3 o'clock. I'm picking my daughter up from school at 2:30, Nina said carefully. We were planning to visit Henry at the hospital. This won't take long. And actually I'd like you to bring your daughter. From what my father tells me she's been very important to him. Nina couldn't read his tone. Was this a good sign or a bad one? All right, 3 o'clock. I'll be there. She hung up and immediately called Gloria. I need a favor. Can you watch Zoe for me this afternoon for about an hour? Of course, baby. What's going on? Nina explained quickly. Henry's heart attack, David's call, the impending meeting that felt like it could go very wrong. You want me to come with you? Gloria offered. As backup. No, but thank you. I need to face this myself. Nina paused. But pray for me, okay? I might need it. Already on it, honey. At 2:30, Nina picked up Zoe from school. Her daughter bounced into the car, clutching a carefully rolled piece of construction paper. I made Mr. Henry a picture of all of us, Zoe announced. You and me and him all holding hands with a big sun because sunshine makes people feel better. Nina felt tears prick her eyes. That's beautiful, baby. He's going to love it. Are we going to see him now? Soon. First Mama has to take care of something. You're going to stay with Miss Gloria for a little bit, okay? Zoe's face fell slightly but she nodded with the resilience of a child used to her mother's complicated schedule. Okay, but tell Mr. Henry I'm coming to see him soon. After dropping Zoe at Gloria's apartment, where she was immediately swept into preparations for some elaborate craft project involving glitter and pasta, Nina drove to Henry's building with her heart pounding. David's car was already there, a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than Nina would earn in 3 years. He stood beside it, looking slightly out of place in the rundown parking lot, though he'd changed from his suit into more casual khakis and a button-down shirt. Miss Rodriguez, he greeted as she approached. Thank you for meeting me. How's Henry? Nina asked immediately. Stable, resting. The cardiologist wants to do a catheterization tomorrow to assess the blockage and determine if he needs a stent. David gestured toward the building. Shall we? They walked up to Henry's apartment in tense silence. David pulled out a key. Nina noticed his hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the door. How long has it been since you've been here? Nina asked quietly. David's jaw tightened. Too long. Years, probably. I didn't realize how small it was, how sparse. The apartment looked exactly as it had the last time Nina visited, except now it felt different seeing it through David's eyes. She noticed things she'd become used to, the worn furniture, the dated decorations, the careful economy of everything. On the refrigerator, Zoe's drawings covered every surface, bright and cheerful against the old appliance. David stood in the middle of the small living room, looking around like he was seeing evidence of a crime. His face had lost its professional composure, replaced by something rawer, grief, guilt, shock. How long has he been living like this? David asked quietly. Like what? Nina challenged, defensive on Henry's behalf. Alone, struggling. In an apartment barely big enough for one person, in a neighborhood that, he stopped, seemed to choose his words carefully. This isn't what I thought his life looked like. What did you think it looked like? Nina asked. I've been paying his rent and medical bills for the past 3 years. David said, I arranged it through my assistant. Payments go directly to the building management and to his healthcare providers. I thought he was fine, comfortable. I didn't realize," his voice broke slightly, "I didn't realize he was living like this despite the money I was sending." Nina's anger softened slightly at the genuine distress in David's voice. "When's the last time you actually visited him? Saw his life with your own eyes instead of assuming everything was fine?" "Before my mother died," David admitted, 5 years ago. "After she passed, I couldn't. Coming here meant remembering her, and I couldn't handle that. So I stayed away and told myself I was still being a good son because I was taking care of his financial needs." He moved to the refrigerator, studying Zoe's drawings with an expression Nina couldn't quite read. "My father told me about you and your daughter this morning. About Christmas Eve at the diner, about the New Year's party, about all the times you've checked on him and brought him food and made sure he wasn't alone." He turned to face Nina, and his expression was complex: guilt, gratitude, defensiveness, and something that might have been shame. "He also told me you work at Bay General, that you're an LPN working toward your RN." Nina's spine stiffened, waiting for whatever was coming next. "I want to apologize," David said, the words clearly difficult for him, "for this morning, for being dismissive, for treating you like you didn't have the right to be protective of my father when you've clearly been more present in his life than I have." Nina hadn't expected an apology. "Okay," she said carefully, "can I tell you something?" David sat down on Henry's worn couch, suddenly looking less like a powerful healthcare executive and more like a tired, guilty son. "And will you be honest with me about whether I'm just making excuses?" "Okay," Nina said again, taking the chair across from him. "After my mother died, I threw myself into work. It was how I coped, by building, achieving, helping other people's families instead of dealing with my own grief. I told myself I was honoring her memory by becoming successful, by running a healthcare network that serves thousands of patients." He looked down at his hands, "But somewhere along the way I stopped seeing my father as a person and started seeing him as an obligation. A responsibility to be managed rather than a relationship to be maintained. I arranged for his bills to be paid, made sure he had financial support. But I stopped showing up." David's voice grew rougher. "I canceled Christmas dinner because I had a conference call with hospital board members in Atlanta. Important business, I told myself. People depending on me, but my father was depending on me too, and I chose strangers over him." "Why?" Nina asked. "Not unkindly. Because it was easier," David admitted. "Because seeing him reminded me of my mother and how much I missed her and how scared I was that I'd lose him too, because I didn't know how to be with him without her there as a buffer. Because I told myself he was fine, he had his life, he didn't need me hovering." He looked at Nina with eyes that finally showed real emotion. "I was wrong about all of it, and it took a stranger you to show me what I should have seen myself." Nina sat back, processing this. "He talks about you constantly. How proud he is, how important your work is, how he doesn't want to be a burden. He's convinced himself that your absence is fine because you're doing such good things in the world. But that's not what he deserves," David said. "He deserves a son who shows up, who calls, who makes time, who values him more than professional success." They sat in silence for a moment, the truth heavy between them. "Why did you want me to meet you here?" Nina finally asked. David stood and walked to the kitchen, opening cabinets, seeing the sparse contents. "Because I needed to understand how he's been living, what his actual life looks like, not the version I've been imagining, where everything was fine because I was paying bills." He turned to Nina. "And because I need your help. My father clearly trusts you and your daughter more than he trusts me right now. I want to do better, be better, but I don't know how. And I think he needs you in his life, regardless of what I do or don't manage to fix in our relationship." "I'm not going anywhere," Nina said firmly. "Henry's family to us. Real family. I know, and I'm grateful for that." David pulled out his phone and showed her something on the screen, an application form. "This is for the Emerson Healthcare Nursing Scholarship Program. Full tuition for RN school plus a living stipend, in exchange for working within our network for 3 years after graduation. You'd keep your current salary while going to school, and the program includes childcare assistance." Nina stared at the form, her heart racing. "I don't understand." "Bay General is part of the Emerson Healthcare Network," David explained.
I'm the CEO of the entire organization. When my father mentioned you were applying to nursing school, I looked up your employment file. Your supervisors have been recommending you for advancement programs for 2 years, but you kept getting passed over because you didn't have the right credentials or connections. He met her eyes. This scholarship program already exists. I'm just making sure you know about it and have a direct path to apply. This isn't payment for taking care of my father, though I'm deeply grateful you did. This is recognizing that our network should be investing in talented employees who clearly care deeply about their patients. But Nina, David interrupted gently. Let me be clear, this has nothing to do with my father. If you'd never met him, if you'd never stayed with him during his heart attack, if you'd never yelled at me in a hospital hallway, you'd still be exactly the kind of employee we should be supporting. The scholarship program exists to identify and develop talent. You qualify on your own merits. Nina felt tears burning behind her eyes. I can't accept charity. It's not charity, it's investment. In you and your daughter's future, in making sure talented people don't get worn down by a system that undervalues their contributions. David's expression softened, and selfishly, I'm hoping that if you're less stressed and more financially stable, you'll have more time and energy to spend with my father. Because he needs you, and I'm not arrogant enough to think I can replace what you and Zoe have become to him. Nina looked around Henry's small apartment, at Zoe's drawings on the refrigerator, at the photographs of Margaret and memories of a life that had once been fuller, and she thought about what it would mean to accept this opportunity, to go to school, to become an RN, to provide better for Zoe, to still have time and energy for Henry without stretching herself so thin she broke. I'll apply, she said finally, but I'm going through the regular process. If I get accepted, it'll be because I earned it. I wouldn't have it any other way, David said. But Nina, you should know that the selection committee reviews applications blind. They won't know who you are or your connection to my father. Your qualifications will speak for themselves. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Can I ask you something? Okay, would you be willing to help me reconnect with my father, to tell me when I'm getting it wrong, to call me out when I'm making excuses, to help? His voice broke slightly. To help me be the son he deserves before it's too late. Nina studied this man who'd been so absent from Henry's life, searching for sincerity behind the professional polish. What she saw was genuine grief, genuine desire to change, genuine understanding that he'd failed at something that mattered more than any professional success. Yes, she said. But David, he doesn't need grand gestures or expensive gifts. He needs you to show up, to call him just to talk, to remember his birthday, to include him in your life instead of keeping him at a distance. Can you do that? I can try, David said, and I will try, every day. After he left, Nina sat alone in Henry's apartment for a few minutes, processing everything that had just happened. The scholarship, David's vulnerability, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Henry might get his son back. She pulled out her phone and called Gloria. Can you keep Zoe for another hour? I want to visit Henry before I pick her up. Course baby, take your time. At the hospital, Nina found Henry awake, looking slightly better than he had that morning. His color was improved, his breathing easier. Nina, he said, his face lighting up, you came back. Of course I came back. Did you think I wouldn't? She pulled a chair close to his bed and took his hand. How are you feeling? Tired, scared, grateful. Henry squeezed her hand gently. David told me what you said to him this morning. About me deserving better. You do deserve better, Nina said firmly. Maybe, Henry said. But Nina, you need to understand something about David. His mother's death broke something in him. He and Margaret were so close, and when she died he didn't know how to process that loss. So he ran from it, worked harder, achieved more, anything to avoid feeling the grief. That doesn't excuse him abandoning you. Nina said. No, Henry agreed. But it explains it, and he came today. Nina, we really talked for the first time in years. About Margaret, about his regrets, about how he wants to do better. Henry's eyes filled with tears. He's trying, that's all I can ask. Nina felt her throat tighten. He offered me a nursing scholarship, to go to RN school. Good, Henry said firmly. You deserve that. You deserve support and opportunity and recognition for how hard you work. I told him I'd only accept if I earned it fairly. You will, Henry said with certainty. Nina, you're extraordinary. Don't let your pride keep you from accepting help when it's offered honestly. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, Nina holding Henry's hand while machines beeped their steady rhythm and the afternoon sun slanted through the hospital window. "Thank you," Henry said quietly, "for seeing me when I felt invisible, for showing up when my own family didn't, for being exactly who you are." "Thank you," Nina replied, "for letting Zoe sit at your table on Christmas Eve, for being open to friendship even when you were hurting, for becoming the grandfather she never had." The next 3 months transformed all their lives in ways both dramatic and subtle. Henry underwent the cardiac catheterization and received a stent to open his blocked artery. The procedure was successful and his prognosis was good. With proper medication, diet changes, and regular exercise, he could expect to live many more years. David arranged for his father to move out of the small riverside apartment and into a larger, safer place. A comfortable 2-bedroom condo with ground floor access, a small garden plot Henry could tend, and neighbors who were mostly elderly themselves, creating a built-in community of people who checked on each other. "It's too much," Henry protested when David first showed him the place. "It's what you need," David countered firmly. "And before you argue, let me explain something. You have resources, Dad. The money from selling your and Mom's house, your retirement savings, her life insurance. You've been living like you're broke when you're not." Henry's face flushed. "That money, it's from her. From the life we had together. Spending it felt like living without her." David finished gently. "I know, but Dad, she would want you to be comfortable, to be safe, to have a place where Nina and Zoe can visit without climbing 2 flights of stairs, to have a garden again like you used to have with her." Henry's eyes filled with tears. "How do you know what she'd want?" "Because she told me," David said quietly. "Right before she died, she made me promise to take care of you, to make sure you were okay. And I failed at that promise for 5 years. Let me start keeping it now." So Henry moved and David helped him every step of the way. They sorted through belongings together, David hearing stories about objects he'd forgotten existed, his childhood drawings, Margaret's collection of vintage teacups, photo albums, documenting decades of memories. "I didn't know you kept all this," David said, holding a report card from his 3rd grade year. "Your mother kept everything," Henry said softly. "She said memories mattered more than anything money could buy." They worked side by side for days, packing and unpacking, and slowly, painfully, began to rebuild their relationship. David started visiting twice a week, usually Wednesday evenings and Sunday mornings. At first it was awkward. Father and son sat together in Henry's new living room, searching for topics of conversation that didn't involve medical updates or weather commentary. Years of distance couldn't be bridged in a few uncomfortable afternoons. But slowly, carefully, they began to remember how to talk to each other. David would bring coffee and bagels on Sunday mornings, and they'd sit in Henry's garden plot, while Henry worked the soil, and David asked questions about the vegetables growing there. "Mom used to garden," David said one Sunday in April, watching his father carefully transplant tomato seedlings. "I'd forgotten that until just now. She had that whole section behind the house dedicated to vegetables." "She did," Henry said softly. "And you'd help her sometimes when you were little. You loved picking the cherry tomatoes right off the vine and eating them while they were still warm from the sun." David felt something crack open in his chest, a memory he'd buried along with his grief. "I'd forgotten that too." "You've forgotten a lot of good things," Henry said gently, "because remembering hurt too much. But maybe it's time to remember, son. To let yourself feel the loss but also feel the love that made the loss hurt so badly." They talked about Margaret that afternoon in ways they hadn't been able to before. David cried, really cried, for the first time since his mother's funeral. And Henry held his grown son the way he'd held him as a child, letting him grieve what he'd been running from for years. Meanwhile, Nina had applied for the scholarship program through official channels, exactly as she'd insisted. Her application was reviewed by a committee that David had deliberately recused himself from, wanting no one to be able to claim favoritism. 3 weeks after applying, Nina received an acceptance letter. She stared at it for a full 5 minutes, tears streaming down her face, before she let herself believe it was real. Full tuition, living stipend, childcare assistance. Everything she needed to make nursing school possible while still supporting herself and Zoe. She called Henry first. "I got in," she said, her voice shaking. "I got the scholarship." "Of course you did," Henry said warmly.
I never doubted it for a second. I start in August, 2 years of school, and then I'll be an RN, a real registered nurse with better pay and more opportunities, and her voice broke, a future that looks different than just struggling forever. I'm so proud of you, Henry said. Margaret would have been proud too. She always said the people who worked hardest deserved the most recognition. Gloria was ecstatic when Nina told her the news, insisting on hosting a celebration dinner at her apartment with all the neighbors. This is how we do things, Gloria declared. When one of us succeeds, we all celebrate. The dinner was loud and chaotic and perfect, with too much food and too many people crammed into Gloria's small apartment, everyone toasting Nina's achievement and Zoe's proud announcement that my mama is going to be a real nurse and save even more people. Henry attended, looking healthier now than he had in months, his cheeks fuller from regular good meals, his eyes brighter from consistent social connection. David came too, looking slightly overwhelmed by the enthusiastic chaos, but clearly trying to understand this community that had become so important to his father. Your dad's doing really well, Marcus told David during a quiet moment on Gloria's tiny balcony. The change in him since Christmas has been incredible. You've got good people looking after him. I know, David said quietly. I'm grateful for that, and I'm trying to do better myself. We all are, Marcus said with unexpected kindness. Trying to do better is all anyone can ask. But David's relationship with Nina remained complicated, layered with gratitude and guilt, and the gradual building of mutual respect. Nina no longer avoided him, but she didn't go out of her way to engage with him either. When David hosted Sunday dinners at Henry's condo, Nina would attend but kept conversation surface level, focusing on Henry rather than developing any independent relationship with David, until Henry called her out on it. You're still holding him at arm's length, Henry said one afternoon in mid-May, when Nina stopped by his condo to help him plant herbs in his garden plot. I'm not, Nina started to protest. You are, Henry interrupted gently, and I understand why. But Nina, what David did or didn't do in the past doesn't change what he's trying to do now. He's showing up, he's trying to build a relationship with me that actually matters, and he genuinely wants you and Zoe to be part of that because you're important to me. It's complicated, Nina said. Why? Nina sat back on her heels, dirt on her hands, trying to articulate the tangle of emotions. Because I was so angry at him for how he treated you. For all those years he was too busy to care. And even though he's trying now, I can't just forget that. I can't just pretend it didn't hurt you. You're not pretending anything, Henry said firmly. You're acknowledging that people can change. That's different. He put down his trowel and turned to face her fully. Nina, let me tell you something Margaret used to say. She said that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending someone didn't hurt you. It means acknowledging the hurt and choosing to believe people can change anyway. But how do you know he won't just get busy again and disappear? Nina asked. I don't know, Henry admitted. But I choose to believe he means it because the alternative is staying bitter and angry and robbing both of us of the relationship we could have now. And because he's shown up consistently for 3 months, that counts for something. Nina thought about her own father, who'd walked away when she was 12 and never come back. She'd spent years angry at him, had let that anger shape her relationships and her ability to trust, and she realized she was projecting that onto David, punishing him for another man's failures. You're right, she said quietly. I've been unfair. Come to dinner on Sunday, Henry said. Bring Zoe. Let's be a family together. Complicated, imperfect, but trying. That's all any of us can do. So that Sunday Nina and Zoe showed up at Henry's condo at noon. David was already there, grilling hamburgers on the small patio behind Henry's garden, looking domestic and slightly uncertain in casual clothes instead of his usual professional attire. Nina, Zoe, I'm glad you came, David said, his relief evident. Mr. David, Zoe ran to him without hesitation, having clearly decided at some point that he was friend rather than foe. Mr. Henry said, you make the best hamburgers in all of Florida. I don't know about that, David said with a laugh, but I definitely try. Lunch was easier than Nina expected. They ate outside in the spring sunshine, Henry telling stories about Margaret that made them all laugh, Zoe chattering about school and her latest art projects, David sharing funny stories about hospital administrators and medical conference disasters. Nina found herself relaxing, laughing at David's self-deprecating humor, seeing glimpses of the man Henry remembered from before grief had made him run. After lunch, while Zoe helped Henry water his tomato plants, David approached Nina as she cleared plates. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Just for a minute." "Okay," Nina said carefully. They stepped inside the condo, where the air conditioning was a relief from the Florida heat. "I know things have been awkward between us," David said without preamble, "and I understand why. I wanted to say thank you for pushing me to do better, for not letting me hide behind excuses, for caring about my father when I failed to adequately." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I also want you to know that I meant what I said about the scholarship. It's completely separate from any gratitude I might feel about you helping my father. You earned that opportunity." "I know," Nina said quietly. "I'm starting to actually believe that." "Good." David looked out the window at his father teaching Zoe how to properly water seedlings without disturbing the roots. "I don't deserve his forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it anyway. And I'm grateful for you for giving him back his joy when I'd let him lose it." Nina felt something soften in her chest. "He loves you very much, he always has, even when you weren't there." "I know, which makes it worse, somehow." David's voice was rough. "But I'm trying to earn that love now, to be worthy of it." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, and Nina realized something important. David wasn't her enemy. He was a flawed man trying to fix his mistakes, just like everyone else. And maybe that deserved respect rather than continued judgment. "Come on," she said, gesturing toward the door. "Zoe's probably convinced your father to let her plant flowers in every available space. We should intervene before his whole garden becomes a chaotic flower explosion." David laughed, a real laugh, genuine and warm. "That doesn't sound so bad actually. Henry could use more chaos and joy in his life." Over the next several weeks, Sunday dinners became a regular tradition. David would bring groceries and cook, Henry would supervise and tell stories, Nina would help and gradually let her guard down, and Zoe would charm them all with her enthusiasm and endless questions about everything. They became something neither Nina nor David had expected, a chosen family, pieced together from loneliness and loss, and the decision to show up for each other. In June, Nina's acceptance letter to nursing school was followed by her first scholarship payment. She stared at the number in her bank account with disbelief, enough to cover her bills and Zoe's needs and even save a little. For the first time in 6 years, since Zoe was born and her father left, Nina wasn't living paycheck to paycheck with nothing left over. She cried when she realized what that meant. Freedom from constant financial stress, the ability to buy Zoe new shoes when she needed them, instead of waiting for hand-me-downs. The possibility of a future that included security and opportunity. That Sunday, after dinner, Nina pulled David aside. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for the scholarship program, but for seeing me, for recognizing that people like me, we're working just as hard, we're just as capable, we just need someone to invest in us, instead of overlooking us." David's eyes were suddenly bright. "You're thanking me. Nina, you changed my father's life. You gave him back hope and community, and reasons to keep living. Helping facilitate your education is the least I could do. Still, thank you." They'd reached a peace, Nina and David, not quite friendship. There was still too much history, too much complexity, but mutual respect and shared love for Henry that bound them together. And Henry, watching them interact with growing ease, felt his heart fuller than it had been in years. He had his son back, not perfectly, not without occasional missteps and difficult conversations, but genuinely back in his life. He had Nina and Zoe, who'd shown him that family could be chosen, that love didn't require blood connections, that showing up mattered more than any grand gesture. He had Gloria and Marcus and the entire Riverside community, who'd welcomed him without hesitation, who'd taught him that wealth wasn't measured in money but in people who cared. He had his health recovering, his garden growing, his days filled with purpose and connection. One evening, in late June, as he sat in his garden watching the sunset paint Florida's sky in shades of pink and gold, Henry thought about Margaret. "I wish you could see this," he whispered to her memory. Our son is healing. I'm not alone anymore. There's joy again, after so much darkness. I think you'd like Nina and Zoe. I think you'd be proud of how we've all found each other. The tomatoes on the vine were ripening, ready for their first harvest. Henry picked one carefully, held it up to the fading light, and remembered a little boy eating sun-warmed tomatoes straight from his mother's garden, juice running down his chin, laughing with pure joy. He bit into the tomato now, and the taste carried him back across decades, to Margaret's smile, to David's childhood laughter, to moments of simple happiness he'd thought were lost forever. And he realized something profound: grief doesn't end, but it can transform. It can make space for new joy, without erasing old love. It can coexist with gratitude and hope. Thank you, he whispered to Margaret, to Nina and Zoe, to David, to whatever force in the universe had decided he deserved a second chance at family and connection. Thank you for reminding me that life is still worth living.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.